September 21, 1966, 6 p.m. Jimi Hendrix plays Cathay Wah in Greenwich Village to a mostly empty room. He's been rejected by 15 record labels. He's thinking about giving up. September 22, 1966, 3 p.m. Chas Chandler offers Jimi a plane ticket to London. "Come with me, I'll make you a star." Jimi has 48 hours to decide. September 24, 1966, 11 a.m. Jimi boards a plane at JFK Airport. Everything he owns fits in one suitcase. He's flying to a country where he knows nobody. It's the biggest risk of his life. September 24, 1966, 10 p.m. Jimi lands at Heathrow Airport, London, a city that will change everything. 72 hours. That's how long it took Jimi Hendrix to go from rejected by everyone in America to about to become the biggest guitar legend in Britain. From complete failure to the beginning of everything. From not commercial enough to changing rock and roll forever. The only thing that had to happen was America had to say no, and Britain had to say yes, and Jimi had to be brave enough to get on that plane. September 21, 1966, 10 a.m. Jimi Hendrix woke up on a couch that wasn't his. He'd been crashing with a friend in Greenwich Village for 3 weeks. His back hurt, he was hungry, and he had exactly $12 in his pocket. Today was supposed to be different. Today he had a meeting at Sue Records, a small independent label that specialized in R&B. It was his 16th attempt to get a record deal. The previous 15 had all ended the same way. Thanks, but no thanks. Jimi got dressed, picked up his demo tape, and took the subway to Sue Records' office. He waited 45 minutes in a lobby before an A&R guy came out. "Play me something," the guy said. Jimi pulled out his guitar and played a song he'd written called Stone Free. It was raw, powerful, unlike anything on the radio. When he finished, there was silence. "Look," the A&R guy said finally, "you're talented, but this isn't what's selling right now. American audiences want clean, simple rock. This is too experimental. I can't take this to my boss." 16 rejections. Jimi walked out of the office and realized he was done. Not just with Sue Records, with all of it. He couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep hearing no over and over, couldn't keep sleeping on friends' couches and scraping together money for subway fare. Maybe it was time to go back to Seattle, get a regular job, except that being a star wasn't in the cards for him. September 21, 1966, 6 p.m. Despite everything, Jimi showed up for his gig at Cathay Wah. He'd committed to playing, and musicians kept their commitments even when their hearts were breaking. The club was nearly empty, maybe 20 people scattered around, most of them talking to each other, not really listening to the music. Jimi played anyway, played like he always did, with everything he had, behind his back, with his teeth, making his guitar scream and cry and talk. Most of the audience didn't notice, but one person did. Chas Chandler had flown to New York specifically to see Jimi perform. Linda Keith, who was dating Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, had been raving about this unknown guitarist for weeks. "You have to see him, Chas. He's going to be huge. If someone doesn't sign him soon, they're insane." Chandler was skeptical. He'd heard pitches before. Everyone knew someone who was going to be huge. But he trusted Linda's judgment, so he flew to New York and walked into Cathay Wah as Jimi started his set. Within 30 seconds, Chandler knew Linda was right. This wasn't just talent, this was genius. The way Jimi played guitar was revolutionary. The sounds he created didn't exist anywhere else in music. If this guy wasn't famous yet, it was only because the right person hadn't discovered him. Chandler was about to become that person. September 21, 1966, 7:30 p.m. After the set, Chandler approached Jimi backstage. I'm Chaz Chandler. I used to play bass for the Animals. I think you're the most talented guitarist I've ever seen." Jimmy nodded politely. He'd heard compliments before. They didn't pay rent or put food in his stomach. "Here's my offer," Chandler continued. "Come to London with me. Tomorrow I'll start making calls. I'll introduce you to Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, all the top British guitarists. I'll get you a record deal. I'll make you a star."
Jimmy stared at him. Why London? Because British audiences appreciate innovation, Chandler said. They're not afraid of different. They're looking for the next big thing, and you're it. When would we leave? Saturday, September 24th, 3 days from now. Jimmy did the math in his head. It was Wednesday evening. Chandler was asking him to make a life-changing decision in less than 72 hours, to fly to a foreign country with a man he'd just met, based on promises that might be complete lies. "I need to think about it," Jimmy said. "Think fast," Chandler replied. "The plane leaves Saturday morning, 11 a.m. from JFK. You're either on it or you're not, but I need to know now so I can buy your ticket." Jimmy looked at Chandler, at this British stranger who was asking him to risk everything on a promise. "Okay, I'll go." Chandler smiled. "Best decision you'll ever make." September 23rd, 1966, all day. Jimmy spent Friday packing. Everything he owned fit into one suitcase. Clothes, a few books, some cassette tapes, his guitar in its case. That was it. 23 years of life condensed into 2 pieces of luggage. He called his father in Seattle. "Dad, I'm flying to London tomorrow." "London? Why?" "A guy thinks he can get me a record deal there."
There was a long pause. "Do you trust this guy?" "I don't know, but I trust that staying in New York isn't working." "Then go," his father said, "but be careful and call me when you get there." That night, Jimmy barely slept. His mind raced with questions. What if Chandler was lying? What if he got to London and there was no record deal, no meetings with Eric Clapton, just an empty promise? What if he ended up stranded in a foreign country with no money and no way home? But what if it was all true? What if this was his shot? What if in 72 hours his entire life changed? September 24th, 1966, 9 a.m. Jimmy took a taxi to JFK Airport. Chandler was waiting at the gate with 2 tickets. "You ready?" Chandler asked. "No," Jimmy said honestly, "but let's do it anyway." They boarded the plane. Jimmy had never been on an international flight before. As the plane lifted off and New York disappeared below them, Jimmy realized there was no going back now. Whatever happened in London, this was it. This was his chance. The flight was 7 hours. Jimmy spent most of it staring out the window, thinking about the 16 times he'd been told no, about the executives who'd said his music was too weird for American audiences, about all the times he'd played to empty rooms and wondered if anyone would ever care. This was either the biggest risk or the biggest mistake of his life. He wouldn't know which until he landed. September 24th, 1966, 6 p.m. London time, 1 p.m. New York time. The plane touched down at Heathrow Airport. Jimmy walked off carrying his suitcase and guitar, stepping into a country he'd never been to before. "Welcome to London," Chandler said. "Your life just changed." Chandler drove Jimmy to the flat in London where he'd be staying. It was small, cramped, but it had a bed and walls, and that was more than Jimmy had been working with in New York. "Get some rest tonight," Chandler said. "Tomorrow we start making you famous." September 25th, 1966, 10 a.m. Less than 24 hours after landing in London, Jimmy was in a rehearsal space auditioning bass players and drummers. Chandler wanted to put together a band immediately, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. A bassist named Noel Redding showed up, played well, seemed professional. "You're in," Chandler told him. A drummer named Mitch Mitchell auditioned next. Jazz background, incredible technique. "You're in," Chandler said again. And just like that, Jimmy had a band. A band he'd met less than 4 hours ago, in a country he'd arrived in less than 24 hours ago, with a manager he'd met less than 96 hours ago. Everything was happening impossibly fast. September 29, 1966. 5 days after landing in London, Jimmy had his first rehearsal with the Experience. They played through some covers, worked on a few original songs Jimmy had written. The chemistry wasn't perfect yet, but there was something there, something that could become special. October 1st, 1966. 1 week after landing in London, Chandler made his big move. He brought Jimmy to a Cream concert at the London Polytechnic and convinced Eric Clapton to let Jimmy jam with the band. What happened that night became legendary. Jimmy played Killing Floor and made Eric Clapton walk off his own stage. The greatest guitarist in Britain couldn't compete with the American who'd arrived 7 days earlier. October 3rd, 1966. 9 days after landing in London, Jimmy played his first official concert at the Bag of Nails Club. The audience included Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, and half of British rock royalty. By the end of the night, everyone in London's music scene was talking about Jimi Hendrix. November 1966. 6 weeks after landing in London, the Jimi Hendrix Experience released their first single, "Hey Joe." It shot to number 6 on the British charts. The same music that had been rejected 16 times in America was now a hit in Britain. December 1966. 10 weeks after landing in London, Jimmy was playing sold-out shows across England. March 1967. 6 months after landing in London, Are You Experienced was released. It became one of the most critically acclaimed albums of the year. June 1967. 9 months after landing in London, Jimmy returned to America to play the Monterey Pop Festival. He was introduced as British guitar sensation Jimi Hendrix. The American press had no idea he was from Seattle. 72 hours. From sitting in a nearly empty New York club thinking about giving up, to boarding a plane to London with everything he owned in one suitcase, from complete rejection to the beginning of legendary success. The story of those 72 hours teaches us something important about risk and timing. Sometimes opportunity doesn't come with guarantees. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger offering you a plane ticket to a foreign country with nothing but a promise. Jimmy could have said no, could have decided it was too risky, too uncertain, too crazy. Most people in his position would have said no.
But Jimmy understood something crucial. Staying where you are when nothing is working is the biggest risk of all. Playing it safe means accepting failure. Taking the risk means at least having a chance at success. When people talk about Jimi Hendrix's career, they focus on the talent, the innovation, the revolutionary guitar playing, and all of that mattered. But none of it would have happened without September 21st through 24th, 1966. Those 72 hours when Jimmy chose to get on a plane with a stranger and bet everything on a promise. If this story of taking the risk that changed everything inspired you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who's facing a big decision and needs to hear that sometimes you just have to get on the plane. Have you ever taken a crazy risk that changed your life? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for more stories about the moments that made legends.